Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh. Dear brothers and sisters, we're from group 3. So, the Western ideology that we're going to present is the rationalism. So, I am the first presenter, Yusuf Salih. So, first allow me to introduce you some basic concept of rationalism. So, rationalism is a philosophical doctrine which believes that reason is the chief way to obtain knowledge. And also reason is the chief way to test the validity of the knowledge. So there are different types of rationalism, and different types of rationalism give different degrees of emphasis on this method. For example, someone who holds the extreme position would believe that reason is the only way to obtain knowledge, while someone who holds the moderate position would believe that reason is the better way to acquire knowledge, but not the only way. But in general, rationalism is against the empiricism, which believes that the sense experience is a real source of knowledge, and knowledge can be only tested by sense experience. Rationalism is also against the existence of mystical knowledge, like revelations and intuitions. So now let's look into the historical development of rationalism. So the early modern rationalism started in 17th century in Dutch Republic, and the founder of rationalism is René Descartes. He laid the foundation of rationalism and for its debate with other schools of thought like empiricism during the Age of Enlightenment. And since the Age of Enlightenment, rationalism became predominant in the continental Europe, while in Britain the predominant school of thought is empiricism. So now let's look into the characteristic and the principles of rationalism. So rationalists believe that the reality has intrinsically logical structure. Therefore, rationalists argue that there are certain truths exist and they can be obtained by intellect or reason directly. In another word, rationalists believe that there are some rational principles exist in reality and they are undeniable. Deny them would cause contradiction. And they believe that these rational principles can be got by pure reason. So therefore the empirical proof and physical evidence are regarded unnecessary. As it is written by Gaddens Dawson, you can see that it is true just lying on your couch. You don't have to get up off your couch and go outside and examine the way things are in the physical world. You don't have to do any science. However, even they believe so, many rationalists still admitted that it is impossible for human being in practice, except in some specific area like mathematics. So that's all for my part. I'll pass it to the next presenter.
My name is Ismail, and I'll be presenting next on the types and impacts of rationalism. Rationalism has influenced people all over the world to think of reason as the center and primary source of authority and legitimacy. Where rational thought could be done independently of our senses and experience to obtain eternal truth. This basically means that reason has a higher power that can lay hold of truths beyond the reach of our sense perception, mystical experience, revelation, and intuition. As the founder of rationalism, René Descartes, stated that reason alone can determine knowledge, and his famous dictum, "I think, therefore I am," which simply means that doubting one's existence in and of itself proves that I exist to do the thinking. Moving on to the examples of rationalism and its activity. The rationalism ideology has impacted many individuals, but has mostly affected the West. From the 17th century, modern rationalism rose to a systematic study of philosophy which had a large impact and influence on the Western people. This led to the development of new culture, the modern, rational, scientific, economic, and social order, and even gave the age of reason or enlightenment its name and place in history. There are many different types of rationalism that were concluded by this. Examples of these are religious rationalism, where truth is determined by reason and factual analysis rather than faith, dogma, tradition, or religious teaching. Ethical rationalism, where it's a view in meta-ethics and that moral principles are noble by reason alone. And lastly, metaphysical rationalism, where the principle is that everything has an explanation. That will be all from me. I will now pass it to the next presenter. Thank you.
Bismillahirrahmanirrahim. My name is Abdullah Lutfi, and in today's presentation, I would like to present about the strength and weakness of rationalism. So, rationalism, the strength of rationalism is that the way we think is pretty much the same with how everyone else thinks as well, and therefore it has a nature of universal and eternal. And to give example, a good example to use is in when during our exam paper. The strength of rationalism is René Descartes' wax. He says that we may see, smell, feel wax in its solid form and call it wax. If we then light the wax, it becomes a completely different form. Now, with different physical properties, yet we still call it wax. In this instance, the idea of wax cannot be obtained through experience but must be thought. And next slide is what is the weakness? What is the weakness of rationalism ideology? The weakness of rationalism is that we cannot gain all knowledge through thinking. We could be thinking of strawberry. For example, we could be thinking of a strawberry and how it would be, but could we imagine the taste of that strawberry? And of course, we cannot. We can imagine the taste of that strawberry. Our brains do not have the capacity to create the taste. We could not simply think, "Yum, strawberry tastes delicious." We can simply think like that because we do not exactly know we would react the how we would react to the strawberry taste. And I think that's all from me. Thank you very much. Assalamualaikum warahmatullahi wabarakatuh.
Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh. A very good greeting to all of you. I am Yusuf Salih, the moderator for this forum discussion. So from the previous presentation, we already know that rationalism is a philosophical doctrine which believes that knowledge is derived from reason instead of experience. So today we want to discuss the main arguments of rationalism. So there are three major arguments of rationalism. First one, knowledge is derived from a rational insight or deductive reasoning rather than from sense perception. The second one is the ideas or concepts that constitute the mind's ability to think are in it. The third one is knowledge of a particular thing is in it. Alright, so without wasting more time, let's start our discussion now. I would like to seek information from the first panelist, Brother Ahmed. Can you explain in more details about the first argument of rationalism? Thank you.
Thank you for Brother Yusuf. Assalamu alaikum and good evening I bid to all of you. Intuition is a form of rational insight, intellectually grasping a proposition. We just see it to be true in such a way as to form a true, warranted belief in it. And the deduction is a process in which we derive conclusion from intuited premises through valid agreements. Ones in which the conclusion must be true. if the premises are true. We intuit, for example, the number 3 is prime and that is greater than 2. We then deduce from the knowledge that there is a prime number greater than 2. Intuition and deduction thus provide us with knowledge a priori or through thought alone, which is to say knowledge gained independently of sense experience. Some rationalists vary the strength of their way by adjusting their understanding of warrant. Some take warranted belief to be beyond even the slightest doubt and claim that intuition and deduction provide belief on this high epistemic status. Others interpret warrant more conservatively, say as belief beyond a reasonable doubt, and claim that intuition and deduction provide belief of the caliber. Still another dimension of rationalism depends on how its proponent understand the connection between intuition, on the one hand, and truth, on the other. Some take intuition to be faultless, claiming that whatever we intuit must be true. Others allow for the possibility of false intuit propositions. That's all for my explanation. Thank you.
Alright, thank you very much, Brother Ahmed. Now let's move to the second panelist, Brother Abdullah Lutfi. Can you continue with the explanation of the second argument of rationalism? Thank you.
Assalamualaikum warahmatullahi wabarakatuh. My name is Abdullah Lutfi. First and foremost, I would like to thanks for inviting me to deliver some benefit information on our forum today. A very good evening also to the moderators, panels, and my beloved audience. So the second thesis associated with rationalism is the innate knowledge thesis. Like the first major thesis, the second major thesis asserts the existence of knowledge gained a priori, independently of experience. The difference between them rests in the accompanying understanding of how this a priori knowledge is gained. The first major thesis cite intuition and subsequent deductive reasoning. The second major thesis offer our rational nature. Our innate knowledge is not learned through either sense, experience, or intuition and deduction. It is just part of our nature. Experience may trigger a process by which we bring this knowledge to consciousness, but the experience does not provide us with the knowledge itself. It has in some way been between with us all along. According to some rationalists, we gain our knowledge in an early existence. According to others, God provided our knowledge since the creation, and still the others say it is part of our nature through natural selection. Thank you.
Alright, thank you very much, Brother Abdullah Lutfi. Thanks for your very nice explanation. So now let's invite our third panelist, Brother Daraz, to give his explanation of the third argument of rationalism.
Assalamu alaikum. I am Ahmed Darad, the third presenter in Group 3. According to the third measure, this is for rationalism. Some of our concepts or knowledge are not gained from experience. They are parts of our rational nature in such way that sense experience may trigger a process by which they are brought to units. Experience does not provide the concepts or determine the information they can claim that the third measure thesis of rationalism are entailed by the second measure thesis. A particular instance of knowledge can only be innate if the concept propositions are also innate. The concept and the strength of this thesis varies with the concept claimed to be innate. The more concept seems removed from the experience and the mental operations we can perform the experience, the more plausible it may be claimed to be. Since we don't experience perfect triangles, but do experience panes, our concept of the former is a more promising candidate for being innate than our concept of the latter.
Alright, thank you very much, Brother Ross. Now we're at the end of this discussion. So to make a conclusion, the rationalism believe that the reality has an essential or natural way of logical structure which contains certain kind of truths, and this kind of truths can be accessed by the mind. So for this reason, the rationalists believe that truth exists and they can be grasped by the mind directly. And also they believe that the truths are so fundamental that denying them will cause us to fall into contradiction. So I think that's all for us about the discussion today. So now let's look into a video from YouTube about rationalism to get you a better understanding.
René Descartes was a French 17th century philosopher, famous above all for saying, "I think, therefore I am," but worthy of our attention for many reasons beyond this. What makes him stand out is that he was a fierce rationalist. In an age when many philosophers still backed up their arguments with appeals to God, Descartes trusted in nothing more than the human power of logic. This is how he defiantly kicked off his book, Rules for the Direction of the Mind. I shall bring to light the true riches of our souls, opening up to each of us the means whereby we can find, within ourselves, without any help from anyone else, all the knowledge that we may need for the conduct of life. Descartes had immense faith in what introspection, guided by definition, sound argument, and clarity of thought, could achieve. He believed that much of what was wrong with the world was caused by misusing our minds, by confusion, bad definition, and unconscious illogicality. His life was an attempt to make our minds better equipped for the task of thinking. To solve key questions, Descartes proposed that one always had to divide large problems into small, understandable sections by way of incisive questions. This is what he called his method of doubts. We get muddled by certain questions like, what's the meaning of life, or what is love, because we're not careful enough about how we break these big inquiries down. He described the method of doubts as akin to having a large barrel of apples, where good ones are mixed with bad ones. To be a philosopher means a commitment to sorting out the entire barrel, to inspecting each apple individually and throwing away all the bad ones to ensure only those of the best quality are left. Another way to think about Descartes, and this explains why he would, among other things, turn out to be such a hero to the leaders of the French Revolution, is that he believed in grounding all of our ideas in individual experience and reason, rather than authority and tradition. In his greatest book, Discourse on the Method, published in 1637, he explained how he had come to write it. A long time ago, I entirely abandoned the study of letters, resolving to seek no knowledge other than that which could be found in myself, or else in the great book of the world. I spent my youth travelling, visiting courts and armies, mixing with people of diverse temperaments and ranks, gathering various experiences, testing myself in situations which fortune afforded me, and at all times reflecting personally upon whatever came my way so as to derive some profit from it. Descartes spent a large part of his adult life away from his native France in the Dutch Republic, since he held the belief, not entirely unwisely, that the mercantile Dutch would, as a people, be far too concerned with earning money to pester a free-thinking man like himself. However, it turned out that the Dutch were a little less materialistic than he'd hoped, and the philosopher ended up moving 24 times to keep ahead of spies and government agents. Descartes' subjective approach to philosophy reached its climax when he arrived at the famous phrase, cogito ergo sum, I think, therefore I am. The phrase first appeared in French, je pense, donc je suis, in the Discourse on the Method, before then appearing in Latin in the Principles of Philosophy of 1644. It was intended to be Descartes' ultimate answer to a question that philosophers sometimes get perhaps unreasonably interested in, namely, how can one know that anything, including oneself, actually exists rather than being some sort of dream or phantasm? On his quest for certainty around this question of whether it might all be a dream, Descartes began by observing that our human senses are deeply unreliable. He couldn't, for example, he said, be trusted to know whether he was actually sitting in a room in his dressing gown next to a fire, or merely dreaming of such a thing. But there was one thing he could know for sure. He could trust that he was actually thinking. His existence could be proved by a neat tautological trick. He could not be thinking and wondering if he existed if he did not exist. Therefore, his thinking was a very basic proof of his being. Or, to return to the maxim, I think, therefore I am. This might not sound like a huge insight, but Descartes used it as an Archimedean point in an epistemologically unsteady world. With this certainty safely banked, Descartes argued that his mind could go on to discover other similarly irrefutable truths. Some of the charm of Descartes' work comes from his entwining of personal details along with more arid philosophical passages. He tells us, for example, that his revolutionary idea came to him during the winter of 1619, when he'd escaped the fierce cold of the Low Countries by hopping into a stove and spending the whole day meditating inside. Descartes epitomizes the solitary end of philosophy. One can, in his eyes, solve the most profound problems by searching deep within oneself. Teams of individuals or ideas passed through the generations, as they are in universities, are deeply suspect for Descartes. Philosophers don't need gangs of scientists using expensive equipment, unheard-of terminology, and huge data sets. They just need a quiet room and a rational mind. At another point, Descartes recounts that he mocked friends of his who once showed up at his home at 11 in the morning and were surprised to find him still in bed. "What are you doing?" they inquired skeptically. "Thinking," Descartes replied. The group was stunned, but Descartes criticized them in turn for privileging often nonsensical practical tasks over the beauty of pure, quiet reflection in bed. In 1649, Descartes finished another great work, Passions of the Soul. It was the outcome of 6 years of correspondence with a royal acquaintance, the Princess Elizabeth of Bohemia, who was a keen amateur philosopher and a rather emotional and turbulent soul. She had written to Descartes begging him to write about passions, in order that she might get to know and control her own more clearly. Descartes obliged, thinking that the ancient philosophers had done a poor job of analysing the passions, and that ordinary and not so ordinary people would benefit immensely from another look at the topic. He therefore opened the Passions of the Soul with a characteristic claim: "I shall be obliged to write just as if I were considering a topic that no one had dealt with before me." The work provides a beautiful taxonomy of pretty much any passion one might feel, as well as descriptions of their causes, effects, and functions. This is followed by another section called The Discipline of Virtue, a manual of advice on how we can control our passions and enjoy a virtuous life. Descartes identified 6 fundamental passions: wonder, love, hatred, desire, joy, and sadness. From these, there followed in his eyes an unlimited number of specific passions, combinations of the original ones. Descartes didn't believe in vanquishing passions, as the ancient Stoic philosophers had proposed, merely in learning how to identify them in oneself and understand their impact on one's behavior. He would have been very sympathetic to psychotherapy. He believed that a key task of being a philosopher was to help people understand and therefore control their passions, that is, become a little less anxious, status-driven, scared, or inclined to fall head over heels in love with inappropriate people. He was optimistic about how much progress we could make psychologically. Even those who have the weakest souls can acquire absolute mastery over their passions if they work hard enough at training and guiding them. Descartes' psychological and philosophical work attracted ever more powerful admirers. In 1646, Queen Christina of Sweden got interested in sorting out issues in her mind and began a correspondence with Descartes. She even persuaded the philosopher to move to Sweden to tutor her in passion and philosophy in 1649. However, the early working hours required, the Queen could only make time for lessons at 5 a.m., and the harsh cold soon made Descartes ill. He died of pneumonia in 1650 at the age of 53. To remember Descartes by "I think therefore I am" is perhaps not as shallow as one might initially have presumed. The sentence does truly capture something important about him and the task of philosophy in general. It signals a commitment to working through emotional confusion, prejudice, and unhelpful tradition in order to arrive at an independent, rationally founded vision of existence.